Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a series that I've been meaning to get to for quite a while, and I noticed recently I'm creeping up on having read almost 1,000 fantasy novels, and it seemed a shame that I would break that number and not touch this series at any point. So when the chance came up to borrow this and read it, I jumped on it immediately, and I did not expect to enjoy myself as much as I did. So these are my thoughts on the Arrows Trilogy, the or also known as the Heralds of Valdemar trilogy. It's one of the I think it's one of the recommended entry points into Valdemar, if not the recommended entry point by Mercedes Lackey herself. And why have I been so interested in getting into this series at some point or the other? It's because Mercedes Lackey is probably one of the most prolific fantasy authors who's ever written. I think she has like well in excess of 400 books out there or something like that. The Valdemar series alone is well over 40 novels, I believe, and it's just one of her many series. One of the many books that she's co-authored and that kind of thing. So at least I think you don't get to publish that many books unless you're very good at what you do. So, like, I don't see publishers being willing to consistently invest in you in that aspect unless you're doing something very right. So, I knew without knowing anything about this series, without knowing anything about her writing, without necessarily even listening to anyone who had anything to say about her writing, I knew it was inevitable that I would read her at some point or the other. So I recently had the opportunity to borrow this bind up with the Arrows Trilogy. I went for it, and it was a doozy. So here's my thoughts on the Arrows Trilogy. So the first book in the Arrows Trilogy, or the Heralds of Valdemar trilogy, whichever way you want to call it, I've seen it referred to as both online, is Arrows of the Queen. So in this book we're introduced to essentially the world of Valdemar and Talia in particular. So Talia is a child who grew up out on the borders of this kingdom, and she comes from a deeply puritanical society, it's a society with a very rigorous structure, and it's extremely patriarchal. The husband takes multiple wives. It's very abusive, that kind of thing. Like Talia is very clearly an emotionally abused and sometimes even physically abused child. She's not much of a child, to be honest. Like, she's very young, but it feels to me like she just kind of skipped over childhood. And one of her biggest pleasures is reading, and she loves to read the few stories she can get her hands on of the heralds. But of course, that's frowned upon by her family, who pretty much just want to marry her off as soon as they can. So one day, as she's out, she comes across a white horse, and this horse is definitely not just a horse. It's called a companion, and it's essentially a magical creature who was out searching for a rider who would become its herald. And of course, it chooses Talia, and they immediately get swept away. They head back to the capital, and Talia, they head back to the capital of the kingdom, and Talia transitions from this very bleak, very dark society that she was a part of, this very abusive society, to the more modern, the more culturally, I guess you could say that just a better place in general, the better society that is the kingdom. And she, in particular, she goes to the Heralds Collegium, and she was lucky enough there to meet the characters who just from assessing her, they understood the situation that she was coming from, and they were able to get the right people in place around her to kind of help her develop. And this first book, Arrows of the Queen, is essentially a Bildungsroman of her time at the Heralds Collegium and going through her studies and learning what it means to become a herald, what it means to become a part of this world. And not just that, but the specific role that she as a herald has to play. Because of course the companion that chose her is not an ordinary companion. It's actually the companion of a particular herald that's called the Queen's Own, meaning they're a herald who will stand as one of the Queen's closest advisors, who will ground her when no who will ground her and help her keep her thoughts and outside of the influence of the nobles of the land, essentially. So when I read that situation, I'm reminded of the Roman triumphs when a general would come back to Rome, and as he would be paraded through the street, there would be a slave at his ear, standing behind him, whispering into his ear, "You're only human." Like that's kind of the role that the Queen's Own fulfills, and gives her advice on these kind of things. Yeah. So, like, immediately, I don't know what I was expecting when I picked up this book. Like, it's marketed as young adult. The cover art actually looks a lot like some young adult novels that I've seen in the past. But honestly, I don't think this book quite qualifies as young adult. Yes, Talia is quite young, but like I mentioned earlier on, given the situation that she's found herself in, she's really not a child. She's being exposed to more darkness in her few short years than most adults in this story have in their entire life. And it leaves her deeply traumatized, deeply mistrusting. And that's kind of where we meet her at the start of this book, in this new setting, where she has to learn all these drastic cultural differences between the society that she came from and the society that she's now in. All of this is kind of why I'm very happy with the direction that Mercedes Lackey took this story in. This is very much a character-driven novel. This is first and foremost a character-driven novel. Like, we have the story of going through the school happening in the background, but it's first and foremost about Talia's struggles, the way she has to interact with these people completely outside of her comfort zone. She essentially has to learn how modern society treats people, and it's a huge culture clash basically. And she starts to develop a small found family kind of thing as she slowly but inevitably crawls out of her shell. But at the same time, it's not all sunshine and daisies for her, because the only reason she's even there in the first place, the only reason the companion was out looking for a herald in the first place, is because the previous Queen's Own died under very mysterious circumstances, and the nobles at court, who are determined to see that role remain empty, would prefer it if Talia never quite made it to court. So their children who were also in the school, they basically institute a program against Talia, and they start this constant bullying that it's very emotionally abusive, especially given her background. It happens right at the time when she's being taught that she has to learn to trust and open up and kind of be a bit more trusting of people, and with some of the people that she's met. And on the other hand, she's facing this constant confrontation from these bullies, and it does escalate, as those things will. Like, it gets to the point where I'm not gonna spoil it, but it gets to the point where she very nearly snuffs it, essentially. And it like, the entire thing is just an amazing character arc, because you see at that point, by the time it gets to that point, you see how much she's grown, how much she's changed, how much her short time at this school has impacted her, and it's just deeply engaging. Like, the entire thing only works because Mercedes Lackey is such a skilled author. She's really good at bringing characters to life. Like these people, there's not a single one of them you can point to and say, oh, they don't feel real. They don't feel like they feel like a cardboard cutout. They're irrelevant. Like they're all wonderfully fleshed out characters. They all stick out in your mind, and they do it without necessarily the gimmick of having a quirk that's their whole thing and all of that. They're just people. They're just people who, and they're such well portrayed people. well portrayed creatures, but they're such well portrayed people that it just makes this entire books more engaging, more rich, more engrossing. It honestly, the book starts rough because of the situation that we find Talia in and the situation that she has to go through, but it becomes a very heartwarming tale, and it felt good. It felt good to read this book by the end of it. Like that's pretty much all. I think that's the best way to describe it. It just felt good to read this book, to see the way her character develops by the end of it. So that's essentially the plot of the first book, where Talia, she has to change and she has to become someone who is capable of being a herald. And the first book is all about her going through that very personal journey. So that's kind of where the first book leaves off. In the second book, Arrow's Flight, we now have Italia is now she's now ready to become a herald, and as part of that, they go through a year and a half of basically field internship, where they'll go on a circuit with another herald to do what heralds do, like mediate, spread news of the Queen's laws and that kind of thing. Arbitrate disputes. Like the heralds in general, they're like traveling justices, but a bit more than that. They act as ambassadors. They act as news bringers. These kind of things. So they and of course they protect the interests of the Queen wherever they travel. So they can act as her spies and these kind of things. So they set out on their circuit, and she sets out with Herald. Of course, he's the dreamy lover boy of the series, Chris. But one twist I did like on him is that he's portrayed as just this extremely handsome guy that all the girls are falling over, that kind of thing. But that's not him. He just wants to be like he really enjoys the academic side of the role, and he just wants to be left alone so he can focus on that. But because of his looks and his status, he kind of gets roped into things, and he kind of gets targeted by women, and so the two of them set out on their circuit, and it's a bit more than anyone expected a new herald like Talia to kind of have to deal with on an internship. It be like they have a whole journey they go through. Also, this is also very much a character-driven novel, in which like we have a whole scenario where they're pretty much stuck indoors for quite a significant amount of time when they're snowed in, and it's very much a life and death situation. Because Talia, one of the things that a companion does for you when you bond with it is it awakens some latent magic that you have as a herald that wouldn't awaken without that bond with the companion. And because of Talia's childhood and the way she grew up, she had this power, but she didn't necessarily have the best control over it. And the foundation that was used to build it, the foundation that was used to kind of build her control of it, it wasn't the best way to do it. And as a result of that, because of the trials and tribulations of this circuit that she goes on with Chris, and some of the things that they discuss, given Chris's his relationships with certain people who have it out for Talia, like they start to her power starts to unravel, and it's dangerous. Like, her losing control of her power is very much a life and death situation, and because of that, their relationship kind of has to change from master and student, from student to master. It has to become something a bit different, and the book is all about them. They're trapped in a situation. They can't do much. They're essentially living under this sword of Damocles with her power barely contained, and two people stuck in a small box. This is essentially like modern urban living. Two people stuck in a small box in winter. They, unless there's a lot going on for you to distract each other, or to distract yourselves from each other, to occupy yourselves. Idle hands are the devil's work. They do start to go stir crazy, and it was just a wonderful situation for me. Well, not wonderful in what happens, but wonderful in terms of like just how it plays out, and the whole setup. Like, it was fun. It was fun to read about, even if the content wasn't necessarily fun. It's just a testament to how great, once again, how great a writer Mercedes Lackey is, how good she is at kind of planning things out and plotting it out, and how she portrays it. And yeah, it was a great. Once again, it was another, like, a bit of a character arc for her, because they kind of both had to grow to meet the demands of their situation. They kind of had to have their worldviews shifted a bit. And when you're stuck in a situation where you're essentially antagonistic to someone who you're also very, very close with, like that, it made for great reading all around. Eventually, they get rescued, and their circuit comes to an end, and over the course of it, like, things do happen that kind of set the stage for what at first seems like a trite romance. But one thing that I did like about how it was portrayed in this book is, like, their a relationship does blossom between the two, but there's nothing romantic about it. Like, it's just two people stuck on board in a box with nothing to do, so they do each other essentially. So yeah, like, it was very realistically done. Like, they're both young people. They both got needs, nothing else to do. Why not, right? That kind of portrayal, and they're like friends with like a deep. They eventually become friends with like a deep bond, and that was just kind of a facet of it, like a whole friends with benefits kind of situation. So, and not so much like romance per se. And it was something that they very carefully portrayed, because it did kind of set the stage for a whole triangle situation that isn't really a triangle, because there's no like, between these two in particular, there's no like love interest. It's just like no love in terms of like romantic love. There is love in terms of like friendship, and just a deep bond with a close friend. But nothing beyond that. But the misunderstanding does set the stage for like kind of trite romantic triangle in the third book, and that brings me to the third book, Arrows Fall. At the start of this book, Talia has completed her trial. She's proven herself to be a competent herald, and she's now ready to basically assume her role as not just a full herald of the Herald Circle, but also as the Queen's own. So she goes to court. She starts to take on a slightly more important role as in her capacity as the Queen's own. She sits on council. She has the ear of the Queen. She starts to like get involved in issues and essentially shift the balance of power, because the Queen now has essentially one more vote she can draw on when she wants things done. And it kind of brings the simmering political battle that was in the background throughout these first two novels to the forefront, because the nobles who did their best to make sure Talia could not replace the previous Queen's Own are now they're now faced with the worst case scenario for them, which is Talia fully within her rights and powers, like actively, essentially working against their interests. So that happens, and the book is largely, once again, it's kind of character driven because she now has to navigate this whole new world, which means she's kind of forced to grow yet again into these new roles, and it's a lot to do because she has her responsibilities as a herald, she has her responsibilities as the Queen's Own to kind of juggle, and some other things happen along the way that kind of complement it. She also has that aforementioned triangle that she didn't understand initially, but which over the course of the story we learn there is also, like, what's happening with her, there is also a bit of a magical component to it. So there is all of that going on, and that's kind of how the first, I would say, 2/3 of the book kind of plays out, just kind of deal with the situation and kind of navigating court life and the perils of the nobles who have it out for her, that kind of thing. And then we get to the final third of this last book, and things went from 0 to 900 in the blink of an eye. Like, they set out, Talia and Chris set out on a circuit that should have been pretty much just an ambassadorial visit to a neighboring kingdom to essentially pave the way for a visit from the Queen. And they walk straight into a coup. They walk straight into a very deadly coup. Essentially, a sorcerer king comes to power, and things get dark. Things get very dark very fast. Like, if you're a person who needs, like, trigger warnings, like, before you read certain things, assume it's all applied here. Like, there's torture, there's sexual abuse, these kind of things. Like, if you want to skip the majority of this last section, or if you even want to just read like a synopsis or that kind of thing, you definitely should. Like, it gets very dark very fast. Like, Mercedes Lackey, now it feels like the character focus and the emotional focus of these books has all been about her building towards this point where she can pretty much punch you with the force of a Range Rover in your gut with what she puts these people through. And it's not that it's not like torture porn or misery porn or that kind of thing. It's just that she has, like, it's just the situation they get caught in and the inevitable consequences of it. And yeah, you, like, the book wraps up in a very, very intense in a very intense way. It's not something you're prepared for throughout this entire book, but given the closest it came to in terms of how dark and how emotionally gripping this whole last third of this book is actually the very start of the very first book, when you start to learn about Talia and the situation that she's coming from, and you realize just how depressing it was. Like, that's kind of the same sentiment that's drawn on to create this last third of the book, except it's very much amplified. Like, it's bad. And of course, at this point, we are much more emotionally invested in these characters. And it's a banger of a way to finish a series. Like, one thing I keep thinking over and over when people talk about grimdark and these kind of things is, like, books don't need to be, like, hyper realistic or super violent to be grimdark. Sometimes it's just about the emotional ringer they put you through, and this book puts you through the emotional ringer with the way it ends. Like, holy crap! By the end of it, I just think back on this series as a whole, and I can't believe, like, what an incredible ride it was. I didn't expect to read books this good. Like I knew it should be a good experience, but I didn't expect to read books this good, this engaging, this compelling when I picked up this series. Like I assumed there would be some things that just didn't work for me or that kind of thing. But Mercedes Lackey simply is just too good an author to not sink her hooks into you. Like unless you're really not invested in these characters, there's no way you're not going to like just enjoy this ride. And as a result of that, essentially get your face kicked in at the end when she decides to do what she does to these characters. Like, oh, I'm still, my brain still hurts thinking back on this. What she does to these people, dear God. I think I'm just gonna call it there because this video is already dragged out too long. I don't believe anyone makes it this far into these videos. If you do, you can shock me and just drop the word pipsqueak in the comments with no context, and I'll know you made it here, and I'll subscribe to you. Like I'll be your friend for life, whatever it is. Like I'll be that shocked. But yeah, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.